Hello and welcome to the Meet the Parents podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 59 of the Meet the Parents podcast and another round of parenting-based chat. I'm Tim from Slouching Towards Thatcham, and tonight I'm joined by Hannah from Budding Smiles and Simon from Man vs Pink. Good evening, both of you.
Hello.
Good evening.
So this week we are going to go from big screen to small screen as we discuss must-see children's films and the merits of limiting screen time. A group of film industry experts have selected the 50 must-see movies that they think children should watch before they're 11. You can see the full list at intofilm.org, but it includes everything from the 1941 Disney classic Dumbo to 2016 films such as The Secret Life of Pets, Trolls and Zootropolis, and ranging from Star Wars and E.T. to Up and Space Jam. So, let's start with a simple question that I suspect is going to put me to shame. How many of the list of 50 have we seen? So, Simon, you're the big film buff in the group, so I'm expecting you're going to put both Hannah and I to shame. So, how many have you seen, and how many has your daughter seen?
I feel quite disappointed to say I've seen 36. Yeah, I was very disappointed in that. I'd like to at least got in the 40s. I haven't my daughter seen? I don't know, but yeah, less than that. Probably, I'm going to estimate about 20, something in the 20s.
And Hannah, how about you? How many have you seen? And has Toby seen any of them?
I've seen 31. Toby must have seen most of them. Actually, I'd say there's only about half a dozen fewer than me. So yeah, he must be around the mid-20s.
Great, so you two have really put me to shame. Not just you, but your kids as well, because I reckon I've only seen 17 from start to finish. Yeah, I mean, Isaac, our eldest, is 9, and he's probably seen at least as many as I have. Yeah, mostly the more recent ones, and he hasn't really seen any of, I guess, what we would call the old school classics. I mean, he hasn't even seen any of the Star Wars films, so okay, I hold my hands up. That's a bit crap, really. But anyhow, of all the films that we have seen, I'm going to ask each of us to pick 2 films from the list. Yes, only 2, Simon, that you would recommend as your own personal must-sees to a fellow parent. So, Hannah, let's start with you. What's your first selection? And tell us a little bit about why you've picked it.
I would definitely have to say Toy Story. Just everybody has to see Toy Story. It's just such a lovely film, you know, groups of people, all different, well, toys, but, you know, different characters who all different in their own ways, but all get on together, and then a new person coming in. And just, I think it's really good for kids to see how a new person can come into the group. And even if at first you think they don't fit in, you can actually end up being really good friends. So that's definitely one that I think everybody has to see.
And it's funny because actually my first choice was also Toy Story. It had animation that was groundbreaking at the time, remembering that we're talking about 1995 here, when CGI animation was still pretty much in its infancy. In Tom Hanks and Tim Allen, it had 2 perfectly cast leads, and the story's just a really poignant tale that puts a lovely spin on the old Hollywood staple of the buddy movie, and it just works on a child and an adult level. And to top it off, of course, it's got a terrific song in You've Got a Friend in Me. And I suppose, of course, it's that rarest of rarities as well. It's the first instalment of a franchise where the sequels are pretty much every bit as good as the original. What about you, Simon? Would Toy Story make it anywhere on your list?
Well, as I've only been allowed to pick 2, it's not one of my 2 selections. But Toy Story is amazing. It's a fantastic film, and the fact it's over 20 years old, 22 years old. You look at it now, the animation, you can, it looks a bit clunky, the animation, but the characters and the designs and everything is amazing. And it's one of those classic animated movies that kind of transcends being just a children's film. I think a lot of modern children's films are very immature, and I don't think there's anything immature about Toy Story. I think it's just a beautiful story with wonderful characters, and it kind of takes you along with it. And I agree about that. Actually, I think Toy Story 2 is probably better, which is kind of an amazing thing to say. It's them as a kind of double bill. And Toy Story 3 is pretty good. They're just, an amazing series of films, and, the best of Pixar.
So what is your first choice then?
Okay, so my first choice, it kind of links in nicely with that, is Spirited Away, which is from the great Japanese animation studio, Studio Ghibli. And John Lasseter, who made Toy Story, is a big champion of the work they were doing at Studio Ghibli, and the director, Hayao Miyazaki. And in fact, all these Studio Ghibli films, you've got these big name Hollywood stars doing the American versions of the voices, like Kirsten Dunst did one film, Kiki's Delivery Service, etc. Because of, he's a head honcho at Disney Animation now, because he just took so much from what they did and put it into the Pixar movies. I just think any childhood should be full of these movies from Studio Ghibli. They're just amazing, beautiful films. I think Spirited Away probably isn't the best of them, but it's a pretty great movie. I'd say My Neighbor Totoro or Kiki's Delivery Service, probably some of the best. But I just wish more people knew about Studio Ghibli and these amazing movies. So if I had to pick just two, I'm going to say one of them is definitely Spirited Away.
I mean, Hannah, what's your second choice?
I'm really stuck because there's so many that I love, but a lot of it is just purely for sentimental reasons. I'm kind of split. I absolutely adored the BFG. It was beautiful, absolutely wonderful. But I have to say that I think everybody needs to see Lion King. I love the characters. I love the music. To me, it's just such a perfect film, and Toby adores it as well. So anytime he asks to watch it, I'm more than happy just to sit on the sofa with him and watch that, singing along to every single word of every single song over and over again. It's just such a wonderful film.
So, Simon, have you and your daughter seen The Lion King?
We have seen The Lion King. We saw it at my local cinema. Does a lot of old screenings. Sometimes we saw it at the cinema the first time. We got it on Blu-ray for Christmas, and she just adores it. And I've got an ambition. I really want to take her to see the stage show, because the stage show is amazing.
It's brilliant.
It's so much better, isn't it? So much better than it deserves to be. The idea of a stage show of a Disney show could just be so magical. It's amazing, absolutely amazing. So I hope we can sort of get our act up and kind of get tickets to go and see it one day, because I took my niece probably 20 years ago or something, 15 years ago, and it was just magical. It's just such a wonderful production.
I have to admit, I've never seen The Lion King, and I don't know why. It's just one of those errors of omission that I've never quite gotten round to it, and it's not been because I don't want to watch the film. I would very much like to see the film, but I've just never got round to it. So, Simon, what about you? What's your second choice?
Well, you're just giving us two, Tim. That's just outrageous. So anyone who follows me knows I love Star Wars. So that's too obvious. My child has been imbibed with Star Wars since birth, so that's just there. And E.T. and the Iron Giant are two other great classics, but then too obvious. So I went for Zootropolis, or Zootopia if you're outside of Europe. It's a Disney film from last year, and I just think it's such a brilliantly subversive movie, especially coming from Disney. There's all sorts of plot lines about racism and sexism and affirmative action, but just kind of encapsulated in this movie that's got funny talking animals and a great empowering female character at the heart of it, Judy Hopps, this kind of bunny that everyone says, can't do anything, like become a police officer. That's ridiculous. No bunny's ever done that. And she's like, well, I'll show you. And then she, achieves all these great things. It's just I think it's partly about expectations with the new movie. I kind of went in expecting something sort of mediocre and it might pass the time. And I was just like, this is amazing.
Yeah, and it's one of our kids' current favourites as well. And you're so right. It is a very subversive, un-Disney-like film to make, and it's not one that you could ever have seen them making 15 or 20 years ago. It's very much a product of, I guess, a more modern, more confident, more relevant Disney that's moved with the times. But yeah, no, it's a fantastic film. That just leaves me with the final choice, and I am going to go for Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. So that's the original 1971 version with Gene Wilder, and not the 2005 Johnny Depp version. It was one of my favourite books as a child, and over the years I've I think I've grown to appreciate just how dark elements of that story are, much of which found its way into the film as well in one way or another. I mean, I watched it relatively recently, and one observation that really strikes me now is that, largely because of the nature of the story and as a function of the way society's expectations have changed over the last generation or so, it's a very white and non-racially diverse film that jars slightly, I guess, with modern sensibilities, but equally it was very much a product of its time. So we'll let that slide as an observation rather than a criticism. I mean, Hannah, have you seen either the original or the more modern version, and any thoughts on them?
Oh, both. Absolutely adore. I mean, I liked the remake as well, but the original is just wonderful. We were watching it with Toby only about 3 or 4 weeks ago, actually, because we'd been reading the book to him. And yeah, it's just fabulous. And it is funny, like you say, to see how that sort of shift in society or in attitudes, and it really is funny watching films from a generation or even just a decade ago, and seeing those changes between then and things like Zootopia now. It's really interesting to see that shift in attitudes.
Yeah, it's funny some of the things you see when you see older films, isn't it? On occasions when I can persuade the kids to watch, even a film that's only maybe 15, 20 years old, let's say, having to explain to them why his characters are running around trying to find a payphone. Daddy, why don't they just call on their mobile? Moving on. Yeah, now's your chance, Simon. Of course, any list of this type is limited in terms of what it can include, and it's obviously pretty subjective. So, although the list is quite big at 50, are there any notable omissions from your perspective? And if so, what are they, and why do you think they should be included?
So for this, all I could do, just to narrow it down, because it's just, I have all sorts of films I'd like to add to the list, but I just kind of looked at our kind of shelf of DVDs and Blu-rays that I kind of watch with our daughter. And so the ones that jumped out was, the first one was that Superman the movie, the 1978 Superman, which, as you know, Tim, I watch a lot of superhero movies, but I still think that's just the best superhero movie. And it's also one of the most accessible to children. It's kind of from a different time when it wasn't as violent, and the filmmaking was kind of more trying to aim to a family. When aiming to a family audience didn't mean it was trying to make it safe. It was trying to be dramatic to the adults and exciting to the children. So I thought that was an omission. And then, as I mentioned before, Studio Ghibli, Spirited Away isn't the best of them, although it's great. So there's at least a half dozen Studio Ghibli movies I'd put on there. Wizard of Oz is a really popular in our house. We showed it again to our daughter really young, and she loves it. And Dorothy is a really sort of key character for her. And then what other ones like from the 80s, like Roger Rabbit and Secret of NIMH, have been really key animated stories that again, our daughter has loved. And then The Empire Strikes Back, which I'm going to put my hands on the table and say I think is the best Star Wars movie. And then more modern ones like Moana, I think is magnificent. Inside Out is magnificent. And then a couple of outliers that not strictly kids films, but again, our daughter loves, are Singing in the Rain and the Errol Flynn Robin Hood movie.
Inside Out is a big favourite in our household, which, again, it's a slightly unusual film because so much of it is so sad.
It is. It's brilliant, but it's brilliant sort of the way it kind of... The idea is actually literally in a 11-year-old girl's head. So that's the character. And then it's a female, the two main characters within that head are also female. It's quite odd for Pixar. They haven't done that really before.
It's such a rite of passage film as well, isn't it? I mean, I found as the mum of a daughter, I was like, oh my God, my baby girl's going to go through all of that one day, and that's terrifying. But it was just so beautifully made.
It is. It's a lovely, lovely film. So, Hannah, what else would you have included on the list?
I certainly agree with Inside Out and Moana as well. The animation is just stunning. The music is incredible. The characters are so vibrant and so much fun. So that would have to be on there. And Finding Nemo and Finding Dory, I just love both of them. They're firm favourites in our house. The storylines are brilliant, and just the sort of subtle humour that runs through it as well. So I think any of those could have very well been on the list.
I completely agree about Finding Nemo and Finding Dory. I guess they didn't want to overload the list with lots of Pixar films, but I just find it hard to believe that they couldn't have found the space for it. It's just such, again, we've used the word beautiful a few times, but it's a beautiful film visually, and it's just a lovely, gentle moral story about overcoming fear and persisting. For me, there's also my take on the superhero genre, The Incredibles. I actually think it would have stood up as a pretty decent live-action film in its own right, but as an animation, you can see the amount of love and dedication that went into it, and all the little references.
It's a great movie. There's a famous comic book thing called The Fantastic Four, and they've made at least a couple of bad movies. And everyone always talks about the fact that they've made a really good Fantastic Four movie, which is The Incredibles.
Absolutely. And again, it's one of those films that works. It works as well for geeky parents as it does for their kids. And then I think finally, the absolute current favourite in our household that appeals to both our 9 and 7-year-old boys and our 5-year-old daughter alike is Moana. Fantastic film, looks stunning, and for me it was a winner anyway, because as a fan of Lin-Manuel Miranda's Broadway phenomenon Hamilton, I love his soundtrack for the film, and I don't think a day goes by in our household when at least one, if not all, of the kids will break into song, whether it's How Far I'll Go, You're Welcome, or Shiny, which seems to be the most popular one at the moment. A slightly different slant. Of all the films on the list that you haven't seen, is there one in particular that you would most like to see? Hannah?
Gonna have to say Star Wars, because I've not watched any of them, which I'm probably you're both gonna hate me for. Toby's really keen on one of them at the moment, and I couldn't tell you which it was. It's one of the newer ones, but I don't know which one. Phil even told me the other day and I've forgotten already. So yeah, I really, really do need to watch Star Wars.
I just don't know how that's possible.
Yeah.
How is it possible to not have seen a single Star Wars film?
Can we blame my parents?
Simon, how about you?
The ones I hadn't seen, then I just looked at the one I most wanted to see, and it turns out it's Coraline, which I've actually had on our Sky Plus box for about a year. I think it's made by the same studio that did this film called Kubo and the Two Strings, which came out last year, which is a really brilliant movie, and Box Trolls as well, I think they did. So it's just got a great pedigree. So I'd really, of all of them, that's the one I'd like to see.
We've already mentioned mine. I think the film that I most want and need to see is The Lion King, and I know, Hannah, I'm sure you particularly love Elton John's musical contributions to the soundtrack, but it's definitely one of the more glaring omissions in my personal movie catalogue. So that's a wrap for our discussion of the 50 must-see movies for kids. If nothing else, it highlights just how many great films there are for children out there, both in terms of old school classics and more recent efforts. There's no shortage of great stories out there for our kids to tap into and to use them to fire up their imaginations. So I guess we better break out the popcorn then. There are a number of topics that come up for discussion on parenting forums and blogs repeatedly. Breast versus bottle, potty training, the first day at nursery, and many of these kinds of topics date back years and years, but one that gets mentioned a lot, that's a real product of modern times, is the debate about how much we should control our children's screen time. So until last autumn, the American Association of Pediatrics had advocated what was called the 2x2 rule, which said that kids should not have access to screens in their first 2 years, and then no more than 2 hours a day. But in an abrupt U-turn, they now advocate against a limiting one-size-fits-all approach. So Mimi Ito is a cultural anthropologist who specialises in learning a new media, and her research suggests that even though kids are growing up in a time when they have incredible access to information and expert communities online, that most of them aren't really tapping into that capability fully. So she blames things like the 2x2 guidelines for holding kids back and putting parents into negative policing roles rather than positive coaching ones. Instead, what she advocates is focusing on developing quality screen time rather than monitoring quantity. So, to start off with, what do we think of the notion of screen time being bad for kids? Is it something you worry about a great deal? Hannah?
No, not really. We get out a lot, we do a lot, we talk a lot, and we watch telly. We didn't own a television until a year ago, but prior to that we did have our computer, which had access to things like Netflix and iPlayer. So Toby, more specifically, as is the older one, he has always had sort of access to the television, but I've never been bothered about it. And in fact, there were certain elements of it which have been really beneficial, because with Toby, he had a lot of frustration when he was around sort of 10 months and upwards. He was a very highly strung baby, still is now as a preschooler. But I taught him to sign as a way of communicating before he could actually speak. And so things like Mr. Tumble were actually really beneficial. He learnt so many additional signs from Mr. Tumble on top of what I was teaching him. And so I had to watch as well to make sure that I knew what the heck he was signing. So I was never bothered about it, because I saw that there were actually a lot of benefits to it as well. And they need to be able to just zone out sometimes too, I think. So yeah, I'm more bothered about what he watches than anything else, that it's not teaching him bad stuff.
And Simon, how about you?
I think the broad idea of screen time is just kind of slightly ridiculous. That it's not about how much they watch; it's about what they're watching, and also how we as parents help them relate to it or deal with it or process it. But having said that, it's interesting that the 2x2 guidelines, I kind of actually stuck to that, and it's also from my own kind of bias, because I'm big into movies and stories. I've never seen the television as a passive object. It's something you engage with. I wanted to wait until our daughter had an understanding of narrative, of one thing leading to another, and just a formation of a story, before we started watching any movies or television with her. So, and that was around about 2. I think we all had the flu, and we were just thinking, oh, this is terrible. Just like, how do we parent this afternoon? And we, and we knew our daughter was just beginning to understand a bit more of narrative. So we put on Monsters, Inc. And that was that. But generally, even then, I still would probably not do more than 2 hours a day. And this isn't, again, because of the guidelines. I just kind of think if we watch a movie, that's probably enough. It just seems to kind of naturally fit. And it's almost, actually, I felt like I was doing way too much when that was happening. And it was kind of slightly reassuring when I saw that advice. But then, as I understand it, that advice wasn't actually based on any research. It was almost like a best guess, or like what they kind of thought should be the case. It wasn't actually based on any evidence to show that anything more than that is bad.
And I guess I'm quite similar to you guys. I think I'd say screen time is something, it's something we're aware of, but it's never been a major worry. And similar to both of you, for me, it's much more about how you use the time in front of a screen rather than how long you spend in front of it. I mean, if they spend 3 hours thoroughly researching and preparing a presentation on, I don't know, a history topic for school, is that too much screen time? I don't think so. I mean, Simon, you kind of touched on this just now, but do you have any other particular rules governing screen time, or have you just kind of taken that kind of fairly broad sort of 2 hour approach?
Well, the only other one, and again, it's kind of slightly arbitrary. I don't quite know why I did it, but like, we don't do any TV or anything in the morning. I'm racking my brain to think why, but it's almost like, why not? Like, so we can do other things in the morning. So we can read books, or we can play Lego, or go out to the playground, or whatever. I don't know why.
Hannah, any particular rules in your household?
No, not really. I guess because our kids are still so little, we do get out a lot. Obviously, now that I've started work, they are with my mum all day on a Monday, and then they're in nursery all day from 8 o'clock in the morning, Tuesday through to Friday. So we're quite relaxed then about screen time and things. We always do stuff on the weekends, but in the evenings, it's a bit like we all need that bit of downtime after a really long day at nursery for them and work for Phil and I. I guess rules will start to come in a bit more as they grow up and have school work to do and things like that. But for now, I think because we do get out and do so much, I'm pretty relaxed about screen time when we are actually at home.
Is there anything in particular that our kids will use screens for? So, I mean, Hannah, is Toby using sort of tablets and such like much yet? And do you find that Martha is drawn to screens at all?
They've both drawn to them, and I suppose having a mum that has been using her phone for work purposes as well, you know, with the blog and things, since they were both born, they've grown up with mobile phones and tablets and laptops very much being around, as I suppose most kids have these days. I think Toby's still struggling to kind of understand how tablets and things works. You know, if we were to give him an iPad, if he got bored, he'd probably just launch it like he would a book. So but I think he is getting to that point, and I have been looking into things like the Reading Eggs app and wondering if there are apps that we can use to supplement things like actual reading of books. Obviously nothing is going to replace that, but if there are educational apps that can supplement that learning as we head towards him starting school, then I'm really keen to find out about them.
Simon, how about your daughter? Does she use screens for anything in particular?
Not really. I mean, she doesn't really use the iPad much, and that's, to be honest, that's mostly about the fact that our iPad is so old. It's an iPad 2, and it's actually older than my daughter. It's just really clunky. It doesn't work very well, so I don't actually use it as much as I should. The screen time is really about the television, so we watch films and TV, and we start to play more video games. Yeah, I've never been one to kind of switch on YouTube and that kind of stuff.
And our kids do use a variety of screens quite a lot. So, you know, the boys certainly use tablet and computer time to do things like projects for school or to watch stuff on YouTube. There's lots of carpool karaoke and car and Minecraft related stuff with them. And Cara, now that her reading and writing skills are starting to come along, she's increasingly following in their footsteps. I guess, you know, she sees me doing it, she sees the boys doing it as well, so it's only natural for her to follow. And Isaac's even dabbled a little bit with blogging, and a couple of times he's created and edited content in the form of audio interviews for school projects, because he's interested in the whole kind of podcasting side of things as well. So I guess there's a reasonable mix of fun and more productive uses. So I'm pretty happy with that. Finally, do either of you have any concerns over kids using screens other than the amount of time that they spend on them? Simon?
Not really. I mean, I don't in myself, but there's an element of parenting guilt that comes in with every aspect of parenting, when, you know, it's something that other people care about and they want to talk about, and they love to tell you how they don't do screens and they just do nature, and I don't know, like, what's wrong with reading a book over having an app, or, you know, kids shouldn't be watching so many movies. I don't know. It's almost like that reaction annoys me and irritates me hugely, much more than any aspect that concerns me about screen time. In terms of our daughter, I basically have no worries about screen time, and we're in a kind of different position than both you guys. We have an only child, so it's kind of controlled in the sense that it's all about what's around our daughter. There's no younger or older sibling to kind of take into account in the way they're engaging with things differently. Like I said, we never had TV on with her until she was 2, but if you have more than one child, that's a completely different dynamic going on.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because with 3, I mean, often we find that one of them will end up putting something on TV or doing something on an iPad or something like that, and that can work out quite well for us in short spells, because it then allows the two of us to spend one-to-one time with the other 2, rather than trying to juggle 3 between the two of us. So, yeah, in some respects, it can be an aid to good parenting as well as an excuse for bad parenting. Hannah, what about you?
No, I don't have any concerns. I think as the kids get older and start using things like the internet generally more independently, obviously I'm going to want to make sure that they're safe online, but I've got quite a while really before that's going to be presenting too much of a problem. So I think it's actually really healthy that kids can learn how to use technology, because we are living in such a technologically advanced age. I agree with Simon. Getting out and being in nature is wonderful, and it's something that we certainly do champion in our family. But likewise, I think from an educational perspective and career prospects and things like that, I want them to learn how to use technology safely and well, so that they can go to school and move forward with their education, being up to date with these technological advances.
It's an inevitable part of all kids' lives. So I think as long as you take a sensible approach, then that's going to be something that's going to be beneficial for them in the long term. So there you have it. Used sensibly and in a balanced way as part of a calorie-controlled diet, screens can be a productive part of our children's lives, and they don't have to be the root of all evil, unless it's Will-O-the-Wisp's Evil Edna, or Tron, or The Ring. So, before we go, what have we been up to recently? Hannah?
It feels like everything is revolving around work at the moment, but we are spending our weekends trying to have lots of family time and go out and see friends and just sort of enjoy that time together. So nothing particularly specific, just trying to spend some nice time together when we're not at work and nursery.
Simon, I think you have a bit of news that's work-related as well, don't you?
Yeah, well, after 5 years of being a stay-at-home dad, been home with our daughter since she was 6 months old, and now she's kind of nearing the end of her first year of reception. I'm finally going back to full-time work, which is quite exciting. I've done I've done bits of freelance work and a bit of part-time work here and there, but this is like the proper line in the sand, going back to full-time work. Aptly or ironically, given what we've just been talking about, it's actually for working for a kids learning app. So just kind of right in those discussions about screen time and kids learning, and interesting times.
Excellent, and congratulations.
Thank you.
It's been an interesting week or so here. I've finally started to have the talk with Isaac about sex and about how babies are made. I've had to tell him that they're not delivered by storks or by Amazon. I think I mentioned a couple of months back that we'd already started to address the topic of puberty, which, as it turns out, was merely a spot of foreplay before the main event. The job of having the discussion was very quickly and decisively delegated to me, but it's been okay. I think Isaac's really appreciated having someone he can talk to privately and, I guess, but also openly about the whole topic without feeling embarrassed to do so. So we've had a few chats already, and we're getting there. And finally, let's just close with a couple of bits of good news. Firstly, the podcast team is well represented among the finalists in the Brit Mums Brilliance in Blogging Awards. Vicky's up for the award in the family category, while I'm a finalist in Reader's Choice. So there's now one final round of voting before the winners are announced. So if you want to vote for your favourite bloggers, get your vote in before this coming Sunday, the 2nd of July, at BritMums.com. It's traditional to say at such times that we're all winners simply by having made it this far. But in Vicky's case, she really is a winner. In the early hours of Monday morning, Vicky Ross and Grace welcomed Rex Martin Williams into the world, weighing a healthy £7 9 ounces. So those of you who have followed Vicky's arduous and at times heartbreaking conception story over the past few years will know what a journey it's been. So congratulations to all of them on behalf of all of us, and we hope to see and hear more of you soon, Vicky. And that's it for this episode of the Meet the Parents podcast. We'll be back next week, but in the meantime, here is where you can find the three of us online. Hannah?
I'm at Budding Smiles on all social media platforms, and the blog is buddingsmiles.co.uk.
And Simon?
My blog is Man vs Pink, manvspink.com, and also Man vs Pink on Twitter and on Instagram and Facebook.
And I'm at Thatcham Dad, and my blog is slouchingtowardsthatcham.com. You can download this podcast on iTunes and Android devices, from our website at meettheparentspodcast.com, and via a variety of podcasting apps. You can also follow us on Twitter at Parents Podcast and Facebook at facebook.com/Meet the Parents Podcast. So thank you very much for listening, and do please join us again next week. Good night.